千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. So without further ado, let's get into 32. Previously, we talked about 32. We did the sectional analysis. If everyone recalls, in this particular one, it's one of the very few chapters in the Daodejing that doesn't lend itself to sectional analysis by looking at the original characters. That is to say, looking at the characters from line to line, we did not see many repeating characters indicating a poetic structure. What we were able to do, though, was to look at the meaning of the lines, and that allowed us to neatly divide it into two halves. So the first half, as you can see in this slide, is about an introductory 3 lines in regards to the Tao, the primary characteristics of the Tao, and then followed by 5 lines talking about the benefits that await you when you are able to hold on to the Tao. In the second half, we have 6 lines that are divided into 3 sets of 2 lines. So each set of 2 lines talked about one thing. In 9 and 10, as you can see, it's talking about names. Names indicating complexity in the categorization of knowledge for humanity. The next 2 lines, 11 and 12, talk about when to stop. That is, not going to an extreme, not going overboard, knowing when to stop. Just like pouring a hot cup of tea, that you want to stop before reaching the rim to avoid spilling the tea and to make it easier to drink from the cup. And then the last 2 lines have actually a very important role in this particular chapter. It ends on a reference to rivers and the ocean. So this matches the other parts of the Daodejing quite well. There are many other references to how the ocean is in relation to all the rivers of the world. So we want to talk about that. We also want to relate it to line 7, right in the middle of the chapter. Line 7 talks about the rain of sweet dew. I want to make sure everyone gets the connection between that line and the very last line about all the rivers flowing into the ocean. And lastly, I also want to make sure that there's a connection that everyone can recognize between the ocean itself, the very last word in this chapter, and the very first character, which is the Tao. So last character, ocean, first character, Tao. So there's a link between the two. That's actually quite important. So we'll be exploring that. All right, so let's continue moving on. This is where we were at last time. So we were able to make quite a bit of progress from line 1 all the way down to line 11. Line 11 says, one should know when to stop. Then followed by knowing when to stop, thus avoiding danger. So both lines, 11 and 12, are about stopping in time, or not going to an extreme, or not going too near when everything will come to an end. And then we will devote quite a bit of attention on the existence of Tao in the world is like streams in the valley into rivers and the ocean. Okay. So as we usually do, I take like one step back from last time, revisit the last slides that we talked about before, make sure everyone is caught up, and with a little recap, allow us to continue forward. So with line 11, one should know when to stop. So there's a dual meaning for line 11. On the one hand, looking at the first slide there, first bullet point there, this can refer to the previous two lines. Previous two lines talked about how from the beginning there were names, and over time the names proliferated until there are many names and a lot of complexity, leading to confusion. So this can refer to those two lines to talk about, well, you should know when to stop adding to something that's already complex. So that is a specific interpretation following the previous two lines. The second bullet point there points to a broader interpretation that talks about using this line for life in general. And when you apply it that way, it's about the moderating influence of the Tao of moderation, if you will, where we stop well before reaching an extreme or going overboard into excess, like overindulgence, like overkill, like doing anything full time, doing anything too much, I should say. So the last bullet there, to know when to stop is wise. However, it is relatively rare in real life. In real life, a lot of people don't know when to stop. If you need to think about some examples that apply to this, think about the people who are, for instance, addicted to gambling. Literally, these are the people who don't know when to stop. They will continue on until they lose everything, until they go bankrupt financially, and then they will try to figure out ways to borrow money so they can gamble again. So for people like that, and also for people who aren't quite so extreme, but still go way too much beyond the natural ending point, that is very common. Think about the people who, after finishing everything they have to say about a particular topic, continue talking, continue expressing themselves, going back to repeat their points over and over again. So this is when we in the West talk about beating a dead horse or sounding like a broken record. We have a lot of expressions to describe this precisely because it is so common in our world. We have so many people who just don't know when to stop. So the example that I showcased last time has quite a bit to do with this as well. And if you recall, last time we talked about how in heist movies, in popular entertainment, we always see this plot where the protagonist, the planner, the mastermind behind a particular heist, is brought out of retirement, or it's always just one last job. This is so often the case in real life that it's made it into our movies as a very common trope. So hence the common expression that we have in the West, quit while you are ahead. And last time we talked about the Chinese equivalents, the saying in Chinese, 见好就收. And the meaning of that is very similar to quit while you are ahead. The meaning is that when you see things are good, you're ahead of the game, you should stop. If you don't stop, it's usually due to greed. It's usually due to just one more. And then you get right on the slippery slope, because just one more is never the last one. Beyond just one more, there's always another. Come on, just one more. And because of that, everything goes horribly wrong. We see this in movies all the time, heist movies as well as action movies. And that's because entertainment will oftentimes mirror what happens in real life. So this is a recap of what we did last time. So we also want to make sure, in the recap, I want to reiterate how we apply this idea to life. Practical and specific ways to guard against going too far. Now, I want to be very sure to mention that when we talk about going too far or going beyond a reasonable point of stoppage, we're actually not talking about pushing the envelope. So in the Tao, when you cultivate the Tao, when you are on the path of advancement and self-improvement, it is actually a very good idea to always go beyond the edge of your capabilities to test yourself, to better yourself, so that you can challenge yourself and attain a victory over yourself. So, excellent points about when it is appropriate to go farther than you could before. And when we talk about how, hey, it's not crowded on the extra mile, you should go the extra mile. So there are definitely cases where we need to do more than we thought we could do. No question about it. This is an excellent point. Here, we're talking about the other side of it, which is knowing when we should not do that, knowing when we should stop short of completion of the end, or the extreme, I should say. Stop short of the extreme. So in the context of pushing the envelope, you know, and I know, that when you are bettering yourself, you can definitely go too far with that. So in training, as an example, you want to go just a little bit further than your current capabilities, but if you go too far, i.e. not know when to stop, you actually overtrain. You actually risk injury. You can strain yourself so much that you lose the ability for a while to continue training as you heal up from your injuries. So in that context, going too far and knowing when to stop, it's actually defined a little bit differently. There is a point when you can go too far and hurt yourself, no doubt about it. That's what this teaching is all about. And then there is a point where you are going beyond just what you could before to challenge yourself. That's actually not going too far. That's actually good for you. So let's talk about the cases where, the other cases where we can go too far. So overtraining, that's one of them. That's excellent input. Let's talk about the other possibilities that we also referred to, that we also pointed to before. Know when to stop talking. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, people go on and on about the point that they try to make, and they repeat themselves. They're sort of, as I said, they become like the broken record, be it a dead horse, etc. Now, people do this, especially if they know they are right, or they're convinced they're right. They do this all the time, much to everyone else's annoyance. So my challenge to everybody is to be different, to not be like everyone else who don't know when to stop. When you are making your point in discussion, in arguments, in whatever, My challenge to you is to make your points and then come to a full stop. That's it. And when you do win a particular argument, my challenge to you would be to not rub anyone's nose in it, to just let it go. That's easier said than done, I know. And that's one of the traps to be wary of when you get into a debate. In a debate, these things tend to go out the window. Also, know when to stop indulging. We talked about this last time as well. I feel like it's worth mentioning again. So the Japanese concept, researchers, when looking into why the people of Okinawa are so remarkably healthy and long living. In Okinawa, it's not a special or different thing for people to go beyond 100 years of age. There are plenty of Okinawans who live beyond 100. Not only that, but they enjoy an exceptional quality of life. That is, they are in command of their faculties. They are still as sharp as ever. They don't suffer the memory loss issues. When we talk about in the West, we talk about, oh, I'm having a senior moment. We often talk about how we become less responsive, less able to recall as we get older. So that's not the case for these elderly Okinawans. They are still sharp, they're still active, they're still enjoying life completely, fully, even beyond the age of 100. So that's remarkable. So researchers have visited Okinawa quite a few times for the goal of finding out what are their secrets. So one of the secrets that the Okinawans have shared is a Japanese expression, harahachibu, which is to say, stop eating when you are 80% full. So that is very much in keeping with this idea of knowing when to stop. What I advise people, this is something that, by the way, I know many people have trouble with. When you're at the buffet table, it is really hard to know when to stop. So what I advise people is to be aware of one thing, that your stomach has a delay effect. What I mean by that is when you've eaten your fill, that you're actually full, it takes your stomach maybe 5 to 10 minutes to register that with your brain. So for that amount of time, 5 to 10 minutes, you still feel like you can eat some more, so you do at the buffet table. And then after that, when the I'm full signal gets to your brain, you've got more food coming in, and that's when you are hopelessly stuffed and become increasingly uncomfortable. Because of that, because this is how the human body works, I advise people to become aware of it and to, when you are getting near the end of a meal, that you take a break, take a pause, that you wait a while, even though you feel like you can still have more food. My advice is to give it a moment, let the signal of the stomach have a chance to reach your brain, and that will help you prevent yourself from going overboard and not knowing when to stop. So let's continue on. Last time, I think you also recall this. What we did was that we summarized all the different aspects of knowing what to do to hold on to the Tao. What I said was that this particular chapter is very attractive in telling us that if you do it right, if you hold on to the Tao correctly, then good things happen in your life. What it calls the rain of sweet dew it will begin to descend upon your world because heaven and earth are working together in harmony. So that's very attractive. Then we need to figure out the other part, which is what specifically should I do to hold on to the Tao to cause the rain of sweet dew to begin descending on me. So this is my attempt to answer the question. What I said to everyone is that we will do it in 2 slides. We will build them up one by one. So in page 1, slide 1 of 2 slides, we've already seen quite a few things that we can do from before, from our last discussion. So plainness and simplicity, this applies to everything. It's about having simplicity in your life, having simplicity in your verbal communication with other people, and also having simplicity in your thoughts, in your interactions with other people. Keeping everything simple, that's one of the things that we must do to hold on to the Tao. Number 2, pay attention to the small. Embrace smallness. There are many little things in life that are, frankly, awesome. If we look through the eyes of the Tao, we will see them all. So my suggestion for everyone is to begin paying attention to all the wonderful little things in life. Plus, the more you are aware of the little things, the more you become aware of the great power that little things will sometimes have. There are little things that we can all do to make a big difference. I'm going to refer you to the last presentation to get at the details and the examples. They're all recorded. They're on YouTube. For now, I just want to note that there are many, many little things that we can do that can make a big difference. Yet another embracing of the small is about the small steps that we take en route to completing the great journey. So the great journey, 1,000 miles, is a long journey, and yet the long journey is completed by us taking many steps. Each step is small, but over time, they add up to an epic journey. So this is from last time. Today, I want to continue building on the 2 slides. So when we talked about knowing when to stop, that's when we can add to it. Previously, we also talked about number 3, which was focusing on the essence rather than the label. The Tao is nameless. And we tend to be attached to labels so that we are removed from the essence of something. So look beyond the label, focus on the essence. Remember, the Tao is nameless. The Tao is something that you feel. So, and it doesn't actually matter quite so much that we call it Tao or the way or something else. And let's add also the awareness on when to stop. Here too, we can apply it to all kinds of things in life. So a car needs not just the gas pedal, but also the brakes. That is, I'm talking about this in a metaphorical way. What I mean is, when you do anything at all, you need to know how to speed up, how to move forward, but you also need to know how to stop. In investing, you always want to know what is your stop loss bottom line before you start, and that way you know when to stop a particular project. So that's number 4. You can see that there's space down below for number 5. Again, we will build our way up to it. It's actually, I think, the heart of our discussion today. And even though number 5 is the last item, it actually goes off into a huge topic by itself. So I want to make sure that we allocate plenty of time to talk about that today, to really do the subject a lot of justice. In order to do that, we are now at the last 2 lines of the chapter, the last 2 lines of Daodejing 32. Let's talk about line 13. Line 13 says, the existence of the Tao in the world. What I want to do here, as we have done with the rest of the chapter, is to talk about each line in the ancient context, the context at the time of the warring states. Then I want to flip it around and talk about that particular line in modern times, in the context of your life. So let's talk about this line in the context of ancient kings and emperors. The world, so heaven and earth means the world to the ancient kings, the ancient Chinese, meant the kingdom or empire. So the ancient Chinese did not focus a lot on the regions outside of China, outside of ancient China. The regions beyond the borderlands were the barbarian, were where the barbarians lived. And they were not as advanced, not as civilized as the ancient Chinese themselves. They thought very highly of themselves. So they felt that where they lived was Zhongtu, or the central land, the center of the world, so to speak, the best place to be, so to speak. Now, their hubris would be something that they paid dearly for later on when they did not advance as they should have. In ancient times, though, for centuries, China enjoyed its status. Ancient China enjoyed its status as the most civilized place in the world. So although there was much more of the world beyond the borders of ancient China, the ancient Chinese were geocentric, that the focus was just on themselves. So that was the ancient context, along with a warning about not becoming too geocentric like the ancient Chinese did, like the ancient Chinese were. Now let's talk about modern times. Let's talk about the world today. In the context of your world, what we're talking about here is simply the presence or absence of your Tao cultivation. So keep in mind, let's all keep in mind that the Tao is ever present, that the Tao is always present. Even though that is the case, the Tao can be neglected through ignorance or willful dismissal. There are times when people know what to do, but decide to not do it. They know what they should do, they know how they should practice, but they decide not to. So this is a different case than the people who simply have never heard of the Tao, not interested in the Tao. So either way, the Tao can be absent in terms of the cultivation of the Tao in your life. So what I say here is that willful dismissal is more common in the form of people not applying the Tao. Here, when I talk about the Tao, I am talking about, generally speaking, the wisdom to live life. So it may not actually go by the label Tao. It may, for instance, be taught as a Christian teaching. It may be taught as a philosophy to live life. Whatever the case may be, though, it's rather common, depressingly common sometimes, to see people who know what they should do, but don't do it. Now, what if they do it? Well, then, in this particular chapter, in line 7, we talk about the rain of sweet dew, if they do it correctly. So there's a little bit more about that we're going to get into momentarily. For now, I want to focus on the last line that you see here, the underscored word, not, as in not applying the Tao. I want to talk about the ways that people neglect the Tao so that they fail in Tao cultivation. I want to talk about what I have seen and observed and share some thoughts with you. Hopefully, so my hope is that you have also seen this for yourself, or you learn to recognize it when you do come across it. So here we go. 3 common ways people fail at Tao cultivation. Number 1, my focus for the 3 common ways is in the West. In Asia, things are rather different. It's a different world, different cultural context, different cultural fabric. In the West, though, I see number one as being rather common. They accept distortions that sound like the Tao but really aren't. So that's a pretty audacious statement. Let me amplify on that. A big one is let go of goals, or the sage has no goals. I see this being talked about quite a bit. I see gurus who have no real knowledge of the Tao peddling this idea to let go of goals, or that the sage has no goals as part of their teachings. And people listen to them and nod along as if what they are disseminating is some great wisdom. Well, I'm here to say that it's actually not the Tao. In the Tao, we speak of, for instance, the journey of 1,000 miles. That's a goal. We talked about in that same chapter of the Daodejing, a tower of 9 levels. That's metaphorical for a goal, a worthy goal. We talked about a tree that grows up from a tiny sapling. So the tall tree represents the completion of a goal as well. As the tree grows tall and strong, it may represent you cultivating a part of yourself, perhaps physically, perhaps mentally, and grow into this tall, strong, beautiful tree in terms of physical cultivation, maybe physical training or mental training, some aspect of yourself. So regardless of the metaphor being used, there are definitely goals in the Tao. The backlash in the West against goals is not something that's authentically Tao-oriented. It's usually people setting up goals that don't really serve them, unrealistic goals that are really just pipe dreams. They suffer the negative consequences when they fail at these goals. So after a while, they decide that goals must be a bad thing. In the Tao, goals can be done skillfully, can be set skillfully, or with a lack of skill. The goals themselves certainly don't care. It is not true to say that the sage has no goals. The sage has quite a few goals, because goals are not a negative thing and they can be set skillfully. So that's one thing. And along with this teaching, I also get I encounter a whole bunch of other equally false ideas, like when you cultivate the Tao, you want to kill your to-do list. That's a dumb idea. You can have a to-do list. You just need to be able to do it in a way that's skillful, that's congruent with the Tao. Number 2, people look for secrets that promise everything for little or no effort. That pretty much describes the self-improvement industry in the West overall. People are looking for the edge, the secrets, the techniques that allow them to get what they want for little or no work. So the primary example for that is the positive thinking type of movements where people learn or think they have learned that they just have to think in a positive way to make good things happen. In the Tao, the recognition is that thinking alone will not do it. It must be coupled with action. In the Tao, it's all about the yin and yang. The yin is the mental process, is the internal mental landscape. The yang is the external manifestations of the internal thoughts. That's where the thoughts, ideas, plans are translated into action, tasks, things you can accomplish. You need both yin and yang in the Tao to accomplish a goal. So that is the quote-unquote secret in the Tao, not really a secret at all. People don't like that, of course, because they don't want to have to do anything. They just want to be able to think about something and have it become reality. So the primary failure, as I'm noting here, that most people fall into, this is the trap that most people fall into. They don't realize that great results is like an epic journey. And the epic journey is composed of many steps. Hence, the great result that you want in your life must also be composed of many steps. And you are the one who needs to walk them all. There's no getting around that. The only thing that you can do is to incorporate the taking of those steps into your life so that they become easy to take, easy to make progress along your own epic journey. Number 3, they misapply Tao teachings to make excuses for themselves. So I have some examples for that. So number 1, they may have done away with the distortions. Number 2, they may have let go of the need for secrets that will give them the results they want for no work at all. Now, number 3, they may misapply Tao teachings. So what I mean by that is, for instance, they study the Tao, they get the phrase, go with the flow. Then they think about the phrase, let it be. Then they begin using these phrases on themselves when they really need to take action. So when action is appropriate, but they want to avoid it, they will say, well, I'm studying the Tao, so I'm going to go with the flow, or I'm going to let it be, as an excuse to avoid taking action. I have also heard people saying things like, I should treat myself better. I shouldn't be so hard on myself. Or they'll say, I need to live in the moment. Most often, I see these phrases being used when people want to indulge themselves in distractions and temptations. That is, they don't want to work so hard at a particular goal. That's when they say, I should treat myself better. So, to kind of summarize this entire slide, I want to point out that everyone has goals, no matter what. Even if it's just to continue breathing, living, continue your life. So a lot of times, people don't want to admit certain goals for fear of failure. Previously, I mentioned how the Chinese as a culture have remarkably less hang-ups with wealth as a goal. I also want to present the other half, the Western thought, it's true, not everyone wants or needs wealth as a goal. Of course, for many, it may be an artistic accomplishment that is the worthy goal. Nothing wrong with that. I just want to point out that some do have wealth as a goal secretly, but won't admit it, and possibly that is because of the fear of failure. And you'll find in general that, when Chinese wish upon one another abundance and prosperity, that they don't have as much trouble admitting that they want something like that, abundance and prosperity, because they can manage it with the wisdom of the Tao. And then number two, when we talk about, secrets that promise everything for nothing, generally speaking, people have a goal. Those that have a goal are not necessarily willing to pay the price. So the price of becoming skillful, becoming proficient in anything in life is a lot of practice. When people with mastery exhibit their art, their techniques, they can make it look totally effortless. They can make it look so easy, so graceful and beautiful. And that's because they have paid the price. And last word on the goals in life is that if you have some goals, but you neglect them and that you indulge in distractions and temptations, a likely consequence of that is that you will end up feeling kind of empty. So if you go with the flow, then you can't really complain about where the currents take you. So lastly, if you don't really have a clear goal defined, I would urge you to think about how you can make peace a worthy goal in your life. Not just to have peace yourself, but play the role of a peacemaker. Be the person who brings peace into a contentious situation. So anyhow, here, these are the most common ways that I have seen people fail at Tao cultivation. Either they believe in distortions, or they're looking for shortcuts, or they misapply the Tao that they have learned. Let's move on. We're ready for the last line of this chapter. So the last line says, talks about how the Tao in the world is like streams in the valley into rivers and the ocean. So once again, I want to talk about the ancient context and the modern context for the last line. Let's do the ancient context first. So for ancient kings and emperors, this meant as the kingdom or empire grew strong, it would begin to receive tribute and allegiance from vassal states, just like the ocean receiving from many rivers. So you can just easily imagine that ancient China, as it grew strong and influential, it became the central focus in an entire region. So in ancient times, China had far more sway over what would be the present-day Korea and Japan, and outlying regions to the north, to the west, to the south. So let's talk about how that applies to your life. In the context of your life, to say that the rivers, the streams empty into the rivers empty into the ocean, in the context of your life, to say that you receive from all these different rivers everywhere, this is very similar to the concept in line 7 of the sweet dew, the rain of sweet dew. That is, the more you are in tune or aligned with the Tao, the more everything works out in your favor. That you begin to receive all kinds of help from places that perhaps you did not expect any kind of help from before. The people around you, everyone is supporting you and rooting for you. Even circumstances seem to somehow work out in your favor. Things are happening, all kinds of people come to your aid, all kinds of things happen to make everything work out perfectly. So this is the kind of magic that one will predictably experience in life. It's the rain of sweet dew. When you have this happening in your life, you will know that it's because you have reached a certain level of Tao cultivation. So a little bit more to say about that. And this is where we begin to get into the ocean itself as a very important metaphor in the Tao. So in one context, the ocean, the vastness of the ocean represents tolerance and compassion. For the ocean to be, for something to be small, a small container of water, that is insignificant compared to the vastness of the ocean. A small cup would be like a narrow mind, narrow-mindedness, narrow-minded pettiness is the way that I describe it here. So a Tao cultivator would want the vastness of the ocean as a mental paradigm. So Tao cultivators are able to accommodate other people. They're not offended by ideas that differ from their own. So these are the easygoing, mellow people. It's okay with them if you disagree with them. They can still get along with you. And then the last point, which we're going to reiterate momentarily, is this. The ocean serves as a stand-in for the Tao, or if you think about it, you can think of it as being synonymous with the Tao, just as thousands of rivers flow into the ocean, ultimately everything, everyone must return to the Tao. So there is an expression, 万法归一, that you see me use here. One, the first character there, that means 10,000. Here it means myriad or all. Fa, dharma. Fa usually in modern Mandarin means laws, as in laws and regulations. But in the Buddhist context, it's dharmas. So 万法 would be literally 10,000 dharmas, but the actual meaning is all dharmas, myriad dharmas. Gui, the third character there, means return. Yi, the last character, is the simplest character in Chinese. It's one horizontal line, it means one. So all dharmas return to the one. Applying this to us, to you and me, to our spiritual selves, we all must eventually return to the Tao. Sooner or later, we return to the Tao. So now we have enough to complete item number 5 of the second slide on holding on to the Tao. So we've already got the nameless parts. We've got knowing when to stop. So let's now talk about the ocean. Be like the ocean. So for this one, I want to mention, I think a lot of you already know, when you come into contact with Eastern thought, a lot of you have seen that once upon a time, in a well-known video clip, Bruce Lee has said, be water, my friend. He talked about the flexibility of water, how when you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put that into a bottle, it's the bottle. He talked about water being soft, flexible, pliant, and yet it also has the power to crush. So water, he said, can flow or it can crash. So he said, be water, my friend. Well, we're going to go beyond what Bruce Lee said. We're going to go with be like the ocean, not just water, be like the ocean. And that actually has a whole bunch of different contexts, nuances, and meanings associated with it. We're going to start with just two. We'll talk about two for now. I think a lot of you guys are already familiar with this, but let's list them all. We will eventually get to all the different parts about the ocean that are very Tao-oriented, that are very, very much part of the classical, authentic Tao tradition. So be like the ocean. The first bullet there, you are lower, humble, and therefore can receive from all rivers. So this is important, where it says you are lower, humble. What the ancient sages specifically said was that it is because the ocean is lower than everything else, lower than the rivers, lower than the lakes, that it can receive from the rivers, from all the rivers in the world, that they flow into it. And to be low is to be humble. Thus, the greatest must also be the humblest. So that is the teaching in the Tao, not just in this chapter, but it's echoed throughout the Daodejing. Multiple chapters mention this. So the ocean itself is about humility, the position of the ocean, and the other, the lower position of the ocean is symbolic for humble attitude. Receiving from all rivers, the easiest, most immediate example is when you see, there's a friend of mine who has done this very effectively throughout his entire lifetime. He was very successful as a manager. I knew him in Canada. He has a habitual phrase. When he sees people and they talk about something interesting, he would say, please teach me. Simple 3 words. This phrase he used again and again throughout his entire life, please teach me. And he always encountered people who are glad to teach him. And this is because he exhibited his humble attitude to learn. And when you do that, you receive abundantly from others. In his case, he received abundantly the knowledge that people had to share. Next, we also want to talk about being vast as a metaphor for being tolerant. So the ocean can accommodate all, that there's room in the vast ocean for everything, everyone. There's more that we need to say about this, but for now though, let's stick to these two, being humble and being tolerant. So this completes our 2 slides on holding on to the Tao. From 1 to 5, if you are able to practice these 5 things, it's a guarantee that you can hold on to the Tao. So now that we have completed the 2 slides, this is a good time to take a break. When we come back from the break, we're going to expand number 5 greatly. So we're not done talking about the ocean just by referring to being humble and being tolerant. There's actually quite a bit more to it. There's a huge history and tradition behind using the ocean as a metaphor in the Tao. When we come back, I'll take you through it step by step. Now, I said that I want to expand massively on the concept of ocean in the Tao. So we're going to do exactly that. So here's the overall setup. Soon after the Daodejing was first written, and we'll just say 2,500 years ago as a rough number, a couple of centuries after that, many other sages came and went, including Zhuangzi, who learned from Laozi. Now, Zhuangzi was certainly familiar with the concept of the ocean as a central metaphor in the Tao. He did not write lines like the Daodejing to express his understanding. Instead, the way that he taught the Tao was to use stories. So one of the stories that he taught, that he constantly told, was a story about the vastness of the ocean called the autumn floods. So we're going to visit with that particular story in a moment. I will tell you an abbreviated version of the story to give you an idea where he was going with that story. For now, though, I want to provide you with some of the famous lines that became classic sayings in Chinese history. So what he wrote about the vastness of the ocean, as you can see, 天下之水莫大于海. And let me explain, and so there's a lot more to it. Let me just kind of go one by one. First, he talked about the world, apostrophe S, water. It meant of all the bodies of water in the world. And then the second line, there is nothing larger than the ocean. And then he goes on to say, myriad rivers flow into it. So you'll see these four characters here. One, the first character means 10,000. In the context of the Tao, it always means many or all. And then we have the character for river. If you take a look at this particular character, the second character in this line, you can easily see that this began as a pictographic drawing, that initially to depict a river, the character that was used by the ancient Chinese was basically three lines indicating flowing water. And then we have the character Gui, which is the same character that you saw a moment ago about how all dharmas return to the one. This is the same character, return to it, meaning the ocean. So myriad rivers flow into it, or you can say all rivers flow into it, or numerous rivers flow into it. And then lastly, we do not know when they will ever stop, that the rivers will flow into the ocean, and yet the ocean is never filled up. So the thought here is that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, constantly the rivers are flowing into the ocean, and yet the ocean doesn't become full or overflowing as the situation would be if you pour into a cup. So this is a reference to the vastness of the ocean. These lines come from the Zhuangzi story called Autumn Floods. And that is what I want to introduce to everyone. And there are some key concepts with the story that I want to make sure you get. So first of all, below this particular slide, you'll see the two characters, and this is also left to right. Zhuangzi, this is the name of the sage. Qiu Shui, two characters. Qiu is autumn. Shui means water. So here, specifically, it means the floods. And that's because in ancient China, the autumn time is when flooding occurs. So this story is about a spiritual entity called 河伯. Those are the two characters there. The meaning of 河伯 is a deity associated with rivers. So like the essence or the spirit of the river. In ancient China, it's very common to look at all different things out in nature and assign a god or a spiritual entity to each one. In that respect, it was very similar to what we know about Druidic or pagan faiths. So the tree would have a tree god, like the guardian of the trees. The mountain would have a god of the mountains. A locality would have a local deity associated with it. So these are minor deities associated with a particular thing in the mythology of ancient China. So 河伯 was the god of the river. So in our story, it goes like this. Once upon a time, in ancient China, it was, once again, autumn, the season of floods. It had rained continuously for many days, and all the mountain streams and creeks were full of flooding water, pouring into rivers, which in turn flowed into and added to ever larger rivers. Eventually, all that water flowed into the main river flowing across the ancient land. That river was so wide that it was not possible from one side of the river to look upon the other side and make out the horses and oxen on the other side. So 河伯, the river god, like the guardian of the river, followed the path of the river, watching over everything, feeling pretty good about himself. He looked across from one side to the other side and saw that the river was so wide, and he felt pretty full of himself. After a while, he came to the place where the river flows into the ocean. This was the Northern Ocean, 北海. He looked and looked out at the ocean, but he could not see the other side of it. Never mind any sign of horses and oxen, or anything else for that matter, on the other side. So for all he knew, there was no other side. He realized that the river that he was so proud of, that he thought was so big, was actually nothing compared to how big the ocean was right in front of him. So he stared at it a moment longer, and then he sighed to himself. He said, I have heard expressions describing an arrogant man, that this man, having heard 100 teachings of the Tao, feels that no one can compare to his level of knowledge, that he was superior to all of them. Now, I see that this expression describing the foolish man may as well be talking about me. And what he meant was that he was so arrogant, just like the man was, thinking that he was superior to all. Now, confronted with the vastness of the ocean, he realized the truth. Upon hearing this, 北海, the Northern Ocean, came and said, well, that's actually very good. You are exhibiting humility. I say that it's good because, you cannot discuss the ocean with a frog who lives in a well. because he's limited by the space he lives in. You also cannot discuss ice or cold weather with insects who only live in summertime. When summer is over, these insects perish, so they have no way of knowing what it's like to see ice, how that feels. These insects are limited by the single season. You also cannot discuss the Tao with a dogmatic scholar. The scholar is limited by his academic doctrines. So you have now come out beyond your river banks and you have seen the great sea, so you realize your own significance. That being the case, it is actually possible for me to discuss with you about the Tao and the great principles of the Tao. And then the Northern Sea continued on, and he said, of all the bodies of water in the world, there is nothing larger than the ocean. Myriad rivers flow into it. We do not know when they will ever stop, and yet the ocean is never filled up. You can take all the water you want from it and still not reduce the amount of water in the ocean. You can have years and years of drought or flooding. You can have changing seasons, and none of these things have any effect whatsoever on the ocean. The ocean far surpasses the rivers because you cannot measure it. And yet, although I represent the unlimited ocean, I have never felt that I am great, said the Northern Sea. After all, the Northern Sea says, I exist between heaven and earth. In that respect, I am not unlike a small rock or a small piece of wood next to a great mountain. I see this so clearly that it's impossible for me to be full of myself. Also, think about this for a moment. If the ocean is contained within heaven and earth, and is therefore insignificant compared to heaven and earth, then what about the land where people live? After all, the land is surrounded by the ocean and therefore contained by the ocean. So I am small compared to heaven and earth. The land is small compared to me. The river is small compared to the land. And speaking of man, when we talk about all the things of creation, the numerous kinds of living things out in the world, man is only one of them, only one of this multitude. And we also can talk about the places where humans live, where they are the most numerous. And yet, all of the areas where grains and foods are grown, where boats and carts go back and forth, that is only a small fraction of all the land. So compared to everything else, including heaven and earth, is mankind not like a little hair in the body of a horse? And yet, with mankind, you'll have all the kingdoms, all the wars waged by kings, all the people who go forth and do their work every day. All of that is nothing more than that little hair. So one particular ancient ruler became known for giving up his kingdom, and Confucius, the scholar, passed himself off as knowledgeable because he talked about all this. But when they took pride in this particular way, were they not like you just a moment ago? in priding yourself on your flood waters? So upon hearing all this, the river god felt like he had attained a new perspective and he was beginning to understand. So he asked the northern sea, Hebo, the river god said, what if I recognize the hugeness of heaven and earth as the greatest, the most significant, and then I recognize also the smallness of hair as the least significant or the smallest? What that do? So the northern sea said, no. There's no end, he says, to measuring things, no stop to time, no constancy to the division of resources, no fixed rules to beginning and end. What I mean is, just when you think you have the greatest that you can envision, that you can think of in your mind, along comes something even greater. Just when you think you have the smallest, the least significant, along comes something even smaller. This is why those with great wisdom look at things far away and the things that are close by. They don't dismiss little things as trivial. They don't give up on big things because they're too big, too unwieldy. In their minds, they can contemplate the infinitely large and the infinitely small. This is why in life, when they gain things, they are not necessarily happy. When they lose things, they are not necessarily sad. This is because those with great wisdom realize there are no absolute rules governing gain and loss. Just when you think you have gained a lot, along comes more. Just when you think things can't get any worse for you, they get worse. It's like that with life. Those with great wisdom, they don't necessarily rejoice in living many times longer than other people, nor do they necessarily think it's a disaster if they were to die young. This is because they realize the meaning of life, the worth of life is independent of its length. So upon hearing all this, the river god said, well then what are the things I should do and not do? How do I take, receive, pursue, or relinquish anything? And the river god said, the Northern Ocean responded, well, from the perspective of the Tao, the thing to do is to attain tranquility and realize that the great Tao has no end, no beginning. It is always constant, always eternal. The myriad things may live and die, and we have to confront all of it with the mind of tranquility. So what should we do? What should we not do? We should all move according to nature. So the river god is a little puzzled by this and said, well, if we do everything according to nature and everything follows nature, then what is so valuable about cultivating the Tao? So the Northern Ocean said, well, those who understand the Tao, it makes sense that they also have a good grasp of rationality and reasoning. And those who are rational and reasonable, they know how to handle any situation in life. So this is why those with great virtue are not harmed by the various dangers of life. It is as if fires cannot burn them, water cannot drown them, When it gets very hot or very cold, it does not disturb them. The fierce animals cannot harm them. This is not because they are different from other people. It is more because they are able to see everything clearly and they are able to handle everything calmly, whether those things are regarded as good or bad, fortune or misfortune. This is why nothing can harm them. So all of this because they move in accordance with the natural rather than the man-made. Upon hearing this, the river god said, well, what is natural? What is man-made? And the Northern Ocean concluded, let me give you some examples. Cows and horses have 4 legs. That's natural. But if you put harness on the horse, put a ring through the nose of the cow, and put a rope around that, that is man-made. It's a contrivance. As the saying goes, do not use the man-made to destroy the natural. Do not use contrived intentions to destroy your own nature. Do not chase after illusory fame. What that saying means is that we must take care of retaining our original nature, to never lose sight of the original nature. This is called returning to the great truth. So I find quite a few things fascinating about this exchange that Zhuangzi wrote between Hebo, the river god, and Beihai, the Northern Ocean. One of the interesting things is that it is also written in the Bible that all streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. So the same ideas have occurred to the ancients in every culture. And there are certainly things that have an interesting correspondence with today. When Zhuangzi wrote about the infinitely large and the infinitely small, I think about scientists today when they look at the very large, universally, and also the very small, the quantum realm. It is as if these ancient sages are predicting that we will get to this point. So let's explore these concepts and bring them into the Tao. So first of all, one thing that I want to caution everyone, you can tell just from the story, you can tell that the ancient sages have specific ways, very specific ways to using the ocean as a metaphor for the Tao. I think it's very beneficial. I think it pays off really big to understand the thought process of the ancients. And the reason for that is that I see the people who do not understand the thought process of the ancient sages can misapply the concept in ways that were never intended. So what do I mean by misapply? It's a kind of misuse of Tao principles. I want to provide a couple of examples to really convey what I mean. Example of misuse. So for instance, imagine someone who appears to be very knowledgeable about the Tao, and then that someone says, sometimes the ocean is calm. Other times it gives you a storm, perhaps even the perfect storm. Therefore, in being like the ocean, I too am sometimes calm and sometimes not so calm. Well, that sounds plausible. That sounds like it might be the Tao, but it's actually not. It's a misuse of the Tao. It's really nothing more than someone looking to excuse his or her temper, poor behavior, and lack of self-control. So what the actual Tao is not about sometimes being calm, sometimes being not so calm. The cultivation of the Tao is quite the opposite, is to cultivate the challenge toward being able to overcome the challenge of being calm at all times, no matter what. To be tolerant and forgiving at all times. So moving from the misuse of the Tao, let me provide an example on the actual Tao. When it comes to compassion, tolerance, being forgiving, it's a story that I title, appropriately enough, Forgiveness. So here's how the story goes. Once upon a time, in ancient China, there was a man who built a great fortune for himself and his family. As he neared retirement, he wished to pass on his vast business holdings to his son. This was his only son and his pride and joy. His greatest wish was to make sure his son would be ready and well trained to take on leadership responsibilities of the family business. And if possible, to make the family business even greater. In order to do that, he decided to send his son away for several years. The idea was that his son would travel around the world. He would travel abroad under an assumed identity, see the world, learn from the world, learn from his experience as part of his training to be ready. So the son went away and did exactly that, travel incognito for several years, learning from his experience. And at the agreed upon time, many years later, at long last, the son was done with his travels and had come home. To celebrate, the old man and his son went to their favorite restaurant to order their favorite meal. As they were getting caught up with one another, talking about their recent experiences, and just enjoying one another's company, there was a mishap. Their servant at the restaurant was new in the job and rather nervous. When he brought out a particular dish, he lost his balance for a moment and spilled a bit of food on the old man's clothes. So the sauce from the dish had gotten on the robes that the old man wore, and this happened to be his favorite robes that he wore for this special occasion. To say that he was displeased would be an understatement. The old man jumped up. His face clouded over with anger. He was about to give the servant a severe scolding when his son stepped in. The son stepped in between the old man and the servant, and with a smile, he said to the servant, We're all right. Everything is fine. The servant was afraid and also apologetic, and he said, I will get something to clean up. So the old man was puzzled by this. As a powerful businessman, he expected competent service, and he felt that this lapse, this mistake, was far from acceptable. But he looked at his son, he caught his son's eyes, and saw that his son had more to say about the matter. So he let it go at that. He let it go for the time being. They finished their meal together, and then they returned home. When they got home, the son told him why he acted the way he did at the restaurant. The son said, "Father, when I traveled incognito, according to our plans, I wanted to learn what it was like to earn a living. As you know, when I'm at home, surrounded by servants, I never lifted a finger to do anything. When I was out there under an assumed name, I decided to take a lowly job as a worker at an inn. So there were quite a few banquets being held at the inn, and one day, after a particular banquet, there were many glasses that needed to be washed. So this was the job that I ended up with. The glasses were quite delicate, so I needed to wash them carefully to avoid breaking them. So I worked on them for hours, and I finally got it all done. I can say that up to that time in my life, this was the most intensive manual labor that I had ever tackled. I must have been extremely tired, because when I turned around, I stumbled against the table that all the glassware was on. Before I knew it, the stacks of glasses that I cleaned for hours, they all came tumbling down. They all broke upon hitting the floor into countless shards of glass. Father, in that moment, I felt that I was in hell. I felt even worse when the manager came, attracted by the noise, and saw the situation. What I did not expect was that the manager asked me, "Are you all right?" And then the manager said, "Let's clean it up together." To say that I was surprised would be an understatement. Much later, after a year of working for this manager, I realized that he was a rare individual, that in an instant, he saw what happened, saw that I was already blaming myself, knew that I would not repeat a mistake, and handled the situation without emotional outbursts. Perhaps he realized that day that this experience would make me his most loyal and hardworking employee. And indeed, he was right. Father, you may be surprised to hear that after a year of working for him, I was very sorry to leave the inn and move on. I did not want to leave. Upon hearing this, the father was impressed, but then he thought about it and said, "Well, son, we don't know if that clumsy servant at the restaurant is as conscientious and worthy as you are." "Perhaps not, father," his son said. "But the truth of the matter is, at least one person out there forgave your son upon making a big mistake." You are right. We do not know if the servant is conscientious or worthy in his character. We do not know what his character is like. But let us not forget, Father, that he too is someone else's son. The old man nodded. There it was, right in front of him. The evidence that he had made the right decision in sending his son away to travel the world, and that his son was indeed ready not only to take over the vast family business, but also make it even greater. The end. So, the ocean, representing forgiveness, tolerance, compassion, is at the heart of the story, even though the story never mentions the ocean once. It does talk about this cardinal value of the Tao. And what the story teaches is that when you want to lash out at someone, when you want to punish, to strike out against someone, think about how you would feel if this person was family. This was someone that you know quite well. When that is the case, when you realize the connectedness that we all share in the Tao, I think you will have a harder time being unforgiving and a much easier time with forgiveness. Okay, so that's the authentic Tao. Now, previously, prior to me telling the story, I mentioned that I had a couple of examples of misusing the Tao or misapplying the Tao. I listed one example, and now let me share a different example. Suppose, once again, you encounter someone who appears knowledgeable about the Tao, who is speaking of the Tao as a metaphor for the Tao, for life, for practicing the Tao in real life, and this person says, just as there is no limit to the ocean, there is also no limits that I impose on myself. No matter what I do, I just keep going. I feel no need to limit myself in any way. So again, it sounds plausible, like it might be the Tao, but it's actually not. In the Tao, self-discipline, self-control are crucial. And this distortion that you see here in the first bullet, it demonstrates how easy it can be to distort the Tao to the opposite of what it actually says. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think about this, there's no limits that I impose on myself. I just keep going. I don't feel the need to limit myself in any way. This is actually a contradiction of the statement from this chapter that one should know when to stop, that one should never go overboard. So now, a question for you. If the ocean should not be misused in this way to suggest that because the ocean is endless, you should also be endless and just keep going? Well, if that's not the Tao, and the opposite of the Tao is knowing when to stop, how would we derive knowing when to stop from the example of the ocean, the metaphor of the ocean? So one possibility that you may want to note is that the ocean is always calm under the surface, that storms are only on the surface of the ocean. Okay, that's nice. It's not exactly what I'm looking for. So let me put up this bullet point here to ask everyone this question. How did the Tao sages derive knowing when to stop from the ocean? And I want to bring this out because I want to illustrate how the mental process works. When you see how it works, you can use it for yourself and derive other ideas that are authentically the Tao. So in this section, I call it illustrating the thought process of the Tao. It is also illustrating the thought process of the sages. So first of all, the greatness of the ocean, like the greatness of nature itself, comes from its openness, tolerance, and acceptance. So let me present for just a moment and have you think about it for just a moment, and then I will use a few examples. For instance, let's talk about the sky. The sky is great because it accommodates all different kinds of clouds. That is, the sky doesn't pick and choose and say, I like this kind of cloud. You, thunder cloud, I don't like you. You don't get to be in my sky. The sky doesn't do that. The sky is inclusive of all. Another example. Let's take a look at the mountain. The majestic mountain is great because it does not pick and choose which rocks to accept into itself. It knows it is made up of all different kinds of rocks. So the mountain does not reject a particular kind of rock. No, you don't get to be part of me. The mountain accepts all, which is why it is great. Then let's get to the ocean. The ocean is great because it takes from every river without exception. It does not discriminate a particular river and reject a river for whatever reason. It does not reject even one drop of water for any reason. So let's stick to that for a moment and apply this idea of the ocean accepting everything. The wide open ocean. When you emulate the ocean, we've talked about the ocean being low at the lowest point, which is why rivers flow into it. So that means humble, that means being humble. So when you're the ocean, when you emulate the ocean, you are humble, you are able to appreciate everyone. You are able to accommodate thoughts and ideas different from your own. Whatever stream or river may be flowing into the vastness of the ocean, it's all right. You don't need to agree with everything, but you don't need to condemn. So the ideal in the Tao is to never discriminate against anyone on any basis. And I think everyone, especially today in the West, we're all very familiar with what discrimination can look like. It may be based on social class, gender, faith, skin color, all kinds of different criteria. So the Tao, the ideal in the Tao is to never discriminate for any reason, like the water accepting every drop of water, like the ocean accepting every drop of water. As you look around in your life, as you think about the great leaders that you have known, I think you will easily see that a great leader already knows all this intuitively. The great leader is someone who leads, serves, and needs everyone. Nobody is excluded. The great leader taps into everyone's uniqueness. When I say uniqueness, that includes unique perspectives and unique abilities, unique experience. In a similar way, in a conflict situation like an argument or debate, when you understand the vastness of the ocean, this whole concept, you need to understand also that everyone is part of your inclusive nature that keeps you from, quote unquote, crushing your opponents, even in victory. Because of your tolerance, you're able to know when to stop and reconcile. So there's and when we talk about reconciling with an opponent, this brings to mind that in Sun Tzu, The Art of War, I think many people already know that it is the highest achievement in a warrior to be able to turn them into allies, to be able to win without fighting. That is the highest degree of martial prowess, is to be able to win without fighting. This insight is not unique to Asia. There was once upon a time, in a speech that Abraham Lincoln delivered at the height of the Civil War, he referred to Southerners as fellow human beings who were simply making an error. An elderly lady chastised him for not calling them irreconcilable enemies who must be destroyed. She was insistent on this, that we must destroy our enemies. Lincoln responded, "Why, madam? Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?" And indeed, Lincoln was right. When you make your enemies your friends, you have destroyed your enemies so thoroughly that not even a single trace remains. So this is how you get to being able to understand the vastness of the ocean and derive from that this whole idea of knowing when to stop. It all has to do with being accommodating and tolerant of differences. And let me lastly move on to the final point about the ocean, one that I feel is also quite important, and I call it Tao, the metaphysical ocean. So we know our physical selves come from the biological process of reproduction. I probably don't need to labor the point, but it's all about conception, birth, growth, maturity, all that good stuff. Everybody knows how the physical bodies come into being. Question: how about the spiritual self instead of the physical self? Where does that come from? And what if the spirituality is just an individual, unique point of consciousness that can be seen as being like a drop of water? So you, the true self that is you, suppose that it is like a drop of water. And suppose this drop of water that is you, metaphysical water that is you, you've decided to manifest in the material world, our world, this world, using your physical body as a vessel. And the purpose for you to do this is to refine yourself, is to be a better version of you. If so, then it makes sense to say that when your work is done in this lifetime, when you've learned your lessons, like the sun traveling abroad incognito, it will be the time to move on, which in the context of life and death means that you leave your body, your physical body, and return to the Tao, like water returning to the ocean. So the drop of water that is you, that came from the metaphysical ocean of the Tao, returns back to the Tao. So this is the final point about using ocean in the Tao. Let's return for a moment back to the autumn floods. That's because I want to summarize everything that we have just talked about. And I call it the 4 teachings of the ocean. Number 1, you are humble and therefore receive from all the rivers. The only point that I want to make here is that when we talk about receiving abundantly from all the rivers, that's just another way to describe how the rain of sweet dew comes down in your life. Goodness occurs. So number 1 is a reiteration of one of the points in the second slide of the 2 slides about holding on to the Tao. But like I said, those 2 points expand further into additional thoughts and ideas about the ocean. And the second point here is also the same. You are vast, tolerant, and therefore can accommodate all. As you have heard from the story, from Zhuangzi, from the sun, this is about the vastness of the ocean being tolerant, accommodating, compassionate. When you put number 1 and 2 together, you get number 3. Humility plus accommodation equal knowing when to stop in a contentious situation. And finally, number 4, the point that we have just talked about now, returning to the Tao, think of it as water returning to the ocean, its source and its true home. In the same way, for us to return to the Tao, the metaphysical ocean is us returning to the true home. So now we're done with all of the examples and illustrations of this particular chapter 32. We still haven't done the paraphrase yet. We'll do that next time. For now, we have just enough time to cover the summary for today. We have 2 parts in the summary. One part is a follow-up on the summary that you saw last time, and this is because when we did the summary last time, we still hadn't completely covered the last 2 points. So you may recall last time we looked at this, Laozi says if we can hold on to the principles of the Tao, then the rain of sweet dew will fall upon us, bringing good things in every aspect of life. So what are the specific ways for us to do that? So there's the plainness and simplicity. There's embracing the small. There's focusing on the essence rather than the label. And today we completely covered number 4, developing awareness on when to stop. And the emphasis toward the end, as you recall, is when to stop in a contentious situation. We also completely talked about be like the ocean. Be the ocean. Not just be water, my friend. Be ocean, my friends. And also, as you saw just now, the ocean expands into additional thoughts and ideas and concepts. Here they all are. So what I call the 4 teachings of the ocean, they include humility, tolerance, which are already in the previous slide, and then to further expand on that into knowing when to stop in a contentious situation, also in the previous slide, This is to illustrate how the ocean ties into all that. And then lastly, returning to the Tao, returning to the ocean, you can think of them in a similar way. The ocean is the true source and home of water, all drops of water. The Tao is the true source and home to you and me. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.